This is Wayward Radio, your official source for news and information on the Wayward Realms. Greetings, fellow wanderers, and welcome to Wayward Radio, your ultimate gateway of untold stories, hidden lore, and the latest updates from OnceLost Games' epic creation, the Wayward Realms. I'm Joe, your host and fellow explorer, ready to guide you through a world of mystery, magic, and mayhem. As we set forth into the unknown today, let me introduce to you our adventuring party, and a legendary one at that. We have creative director of the Wayward Realms, Ted Peterson, with us today. Ted, how you doing?
I'm doing well. Hope you are.
I absolutely am. And the technical director of the Wayward Realms, Julian Lefay, is with us as well. How you doing, Julian?
I'm doing very well, thank you. How are you?
Very good. It's a real treat to have you two gentlemen sitting down with us today. Not just the fathers of the Elder Scrolls, but now a brand new project, the Wayward Realms, which is still in early development and a few years out from release. But these gentlemen have been working diligently with a dedicated team of professionals to bring this game closer and closer to a reality. In a world where the gaming industry is throwing itself shamelessly at microtransactions and battle passes, Ted, Julian, and the team working on the Wayward Realms are leading the charge back to a bygone era where the worlds were the size of Britain and the gameplay didn't require a subscription fee. Thank you so much for giving us your time today. Let's just jump right into the interview. Ted, and then Julian, many of our listeners recognize you as key figures behind the creation of the Elder Scrolls. Can you briefly share your contributions to the series and how they influenced the development of the Wayward Realms?
So I was brought on to Bethesda in the early 90s, and first thing that Julian did was gave me a test to see how well I knew role-playing games. And so that was my introduction into what I had to do, and it's really funny because, of course, my parents thought I was wasting my time in learning D&D and stuff like that.
No, it's
Sure, and then it turns out that that's been my living for a while.
right.
So my introduction to the Elder Scrolls was help design Arena, the first Elder Scrolls game, and was lead designer on Daggerfall, the second one, and then worked on Morrowind and Oblivion. Didn't do anything really to speak of for Skyrim, but been involved in the world building and the game design and the system design and everything like that on it from the beginning. So
Right. And, as one, dedicated player to the series, I can share with you that one of the things that all of us Elder Scrolls fans have in common is falling in love with the world, the immersion, the exploration of it. It really is. Other games do it too, but there's just something one of a kind. And going back to Daggerfall, which is still one of my favorite Elder Scrolls games, I would put Oblivion and Skyrim as sharing number one, and then of course Daggerfall would be a very close number two. That world building that's inside Daggerfall is incredible. I was bowled over going into a town once and discovering there's a holiday today, and and the kind of impact that had on the game, maybe small, but it's still there. So, really, really incredible.
A lot of times those little touches is what helps immersion a lot. They don't necessarily contribute anything to gameplay. I remember first time I saw Ultima Underworld. which was the first ever 3D, like proper 3D fantasy game. And I was talking to one of the guys who had worked on it. And in the first room, there's a ball you can pick up, and you can throw it, and it bounces off the wall, off the floor. So, and that's it. That's all it did. There was literally no reason to have it at all, but it's simply there because it helps in immersion and you sort of accept the environment a lot better. So
Yeah.
a lot of things that may seem like they're not directly contributing really do add a lot, especially cumulatively, to the game experience.
I couldn't agree with you more, Julian. Just so we know, like, what year are we talking about here with that?
God, what year was that?
For
90.
Ultima Underworld,
Yeah,
92,
yeah,
94.
yeah. It's somewhere like the very early 90s. I'm really bad at years. I couldn't even tell you when we started Daggerfall or Arena, when it came out, or any of
Well,
that.
we know because we went to GDC this year to celebrate 30th anniversary of Arena. So
Yeah.
Wow,
Okay. Oh, so it came out in '94. All right.
30 years, unbelievable.
Yeah. Let's move right past that. That's
I mean, both of us were like 10.
yeah.
Right,
Minus.
as was I.
Oh, well, yeah, accurately.
Now, Julian, I want to stick with you for a moment here. I did ask Ted about his contributions. Would you mind sharing with our audience your contributions to the Elder Scrolls?
Well, I mean, I did the bulk of the programming on him. Some design work, and I was also the chief engineer for Bethesda Softworks at the time. So also had to sort of deal with everything else we did. But basically lead everything but writer and design, which were Ted and others were doing most of that. I got to do some of that as well, but and on a much minor scale. So, but everything else pretty much, not music. Eric Heberling did the music, also doing the music for Wayward Realms.
But I was going to say, Eric is back on Wayward Realms because he did the games or the music for our first two games. But Julian does have a music background and was very opinionated about.
Yeah, yeah. Well, everything. I mean, that's the one thing. I mean, as project lead on the Elder Scrolls during those days, everything ultimately had to get past me. And if it's something that I feel strongly about or that I know how to do, like music and so on, I will be. I mean, I won't be nitpicky, but I will certainly pay attention to it.
Right.
But I never got to do the music for either of the games. There just wasn't enough. There were too many things to do. We were a small company back then, so there just wasn't enough people.
No, it was definitely a mom and pop shop back in the
Yeah,
day.
yeah.
Unbelievable.
And that was after we grew. When I started at Bethesda, we were 4 people, including me.
Wow. It's incredible to think about Bethesda being, a small startup like that, especially now. It's been sold to Microsoft. It's got, what 500 employees plus, I think, at this point.
Last time when almost 2,000. Last time I talked to Todd, and that's been a little while. So yeah, they're getting really large.
Yeah. Unbelievable. So okay. And I know the story of the Elder Scrolls has been rehashed many different times. We don't have to, rehash it here. We really want to focus, of course, on the Wayward Realms, but I do want to note that and the composer, Eric, and I don't know how to say his last name. I'm going to try it.
Heberling.
Okay. Eric Heberling. I do hear the influence of Daggerfall in the score, which is available on YouTube now at his YouTube channel, on the Wayward Realms. I hear that influence, and to make that connection, music really does draw us in as gamers. And you gentlemen like to say that the Wayward Realms is a spiritual successor to Daggerfall. It absolutely, when you draw in Eric Heberling's compositions for the Wayward Realms, it really does feel like that the spirit behind the game is already there.
Yeah, very much on purpose.
Yeah, I mean, music is a trigger for that. I mean, we all have to we hear some song or some music. Like, oh, I remember. Remember. So that same thing is true with games, especially when you play them for a long time. That music kind of you will always associate music and the feelings you had at the time. I know there's games where if I just hear the music, I can envision the very missions I was playing with that, and so and it was a real scoop to kind of getting back on it because that will certainly time together because his music still sounds like Eric Hepperling, right? So
Right.
And there was at least one composition he did it for Daggerfall. I think it was Winter or something. I can't remember the title of the music, but like he definitely does a theme on that.
yeah, Winter's one. Yeah, I mean, yeah, he sort of sounds like it sounds like Winter, right? That's one of the some of the music I remember the best from Daggerfall was the Winter music.
Staying on this topic, I want to jump over to Ted here on this idea that the Wayward Realms is a spiritual successor to Daggerfall. Can you explain to myself and the audience in what ways, other than music, is the Wayward Realms that spiritual successor to Daggerfall?
Well, we chose Daggerfall over Arena because uh, to us, Daggerfall had the most potential that was kind of unrealized. That we thought the game series was going to go in a certain direction, and obviously I can't complain about like the success of it, but the creative direction, like it could have been better. um and so we kind of took a big step into how linear role playing games have become, uh, how um, staid they had become, and you just knew what to expect all the time. And we said, we like people don't know what they're missing. Like role playing games could be so much better than they are,
Mm,
and we just said, well, if you know we can beg people to do it, or we can just do it ourselves.
mm,
So, and then obviously the successor element is nowadays so many things that we had to, you know, sweat to make happen are actually out there, where we have an engine that we can just like, hook onto and test things out, and if we need to buy a skeleton model just to test it out, then we can do that. We'll make your own skeletons, but we can do that just for the process of testing everything. It's game development is so much easier in really most ways.
I
Um,
say, okay, if I can just comment a little bit on the spiritual successor, I think that we had very definite ideas. At least I did about as I was going through and we were making Daggerfall. I was like, there's a lot of instances where I think like, man, I wish we could do this, and wouldn't it be cool if such and such? And
mm,
man, I wish this was more coherent. I wish there was more, this is more believable. Or I wish that this stuff would go on. And so 'cause being a game master for most of my life up to then, it's like you always kind of think of the plot and stories and cool things you can put in there. So all those thoughts would happen to me and we simply didn't have the time and frequently didn't have the technology to do that at the time. And but by the time we were done with it, it's like, okay, the next one we're going to put this in, we're going to put that in, and we never, none of us got to work on the next one. Um, but the idea is that now we have another chance to do the next one. But the added advantage that technology is much further ahead now than it was 30 years ago. So so this is basically the next one. What we would have done after Daggerfall and then some, because we now have the technology to do it.
I'd like to ask both of you as well about the core vision of Wayward Realms. How does it differ or build upon your previous work with Daggerfall?
I think that sort of what I alluded to in the. It's still somewhat vanilla fantasy, but it's there are a lot of things you can do that aren't too expensive that people still don't do. There's little features that, like, if you look at what is the name of the it's Battle Brothers, I think. Is that the name of it? Anyways, there's you travel around in that game and you have a little group of fighters and you fight various monsters and whatnot. But one thing you do, you can eventually get a cart, and then in that cart you can, if you know there's war or something going on, you can, they need lumber, they need supplies, so let's buy it here where it's cheap, and let's just drag it with it and sell it off and make a little bit of profit. It's not at all what the game is about. It has nothing to do with the game itself, but it's something they threw in there, and that became suddenly a large part of the game where people don't speculate in that and try to make money that way. And it's such a simple and crude interface because it was clear that it was not meant to be anything more than just, hey, here's a way to do that. And so people will, if you give them enough, they'll run with it and do the rest for you. And little basic things like that. What if there are different prices and they're dependent on the world, and that's something we couldn't do in the old one. And what if you buy something here and you sell it there, and there's a price difference, you make a profit? Now you have a trading system.
Yeah.
Right. Then it's just a question how fancy do you want to make it? But that's really more of a UI issue, and how does it play so it isn't something that sticks out or gets in the way. And the other things arise from that. But the basics of what you need for almost any system, when you just boil it down to the bare minimum, is next to nothing, right? And they fit well into these systems, and as long as they're not pushing themselves on you, so that if you feel like you don't care, you're not going to do it, then don't click that button, and you will never know, right? It'll never get in your way, but it adds a lot of depth and a lot of immersion to the world, and it will appeal to different people, or maybe to same people on different days, right? So
sure.
So the core vision was to simply mostly not to sort of come up with anything that changes what's there, but to really flesh it out. Because I mean, what's better than playing a role-playing game? Well, that would be to actually be in a fantasy world.
Oh yeah.
Right? But since we can't quite do that, let's try to make the world as we can as real as possible. Let's make sure that people that you meet remember you, or remember things about you, and not just with, this particular question, that particular question. If you talk to somebody a lot, or if you buy things from them, there should be a positive memory that you don't build over time. Right? Now, you may have millions of people, but they should have memories, right? They should have proper schedules, so it's not just these people tend to sit in the house their entire lives because that's where they live, and
waiting for you to show up.
Yeah, and that's there are a lot of the things where let's come up with a simple system so that at least they do stuff that is sensible.
Yeah,
based on what they are, and that is not that difficult in and of itself. But right there, you already have a lot, and if you get something that's reasonable, then people will take it the rest of the way. Right. So that's the idea, is to simply start making the world much more real.
Yeah.
And obviously, since it's this many years later, graphically it's going to look miles better. And
So
you get all those things, and then the story is going to be better.
No,
and
the
all
graphic
3D
stuff is amazing.
Exactly. So we're getting that already, but the point is not to make a a prettier Daggerfall. The point is to make a better one,
right?
And that's in the world.
I know, Julian, you've been talking about the VGM, the Virtual Game Master, and I kind of feel like maybe the conversation is going in that direction here with systems. So I want to ask now, regarding the Virtual Game Master, how is it different than what we've seen before in, like, Radiant AI, which was, made very obvious and famous, I think, in Oblivion, and also, hilariously so.
Yeah, I mean, exactly right. It's um, there's some things about the quests that we developed for Elder Scrolls, and that we sort of carried further along in this. The running the actual quest, the mechanics of running the quest itself, is really not that different from one to one system to another system and so on. They're simply just triggers that triggered. Okay, and then this happens and that happens, and if you've done this and this happens, there's some logic under there, and that's really no different. The question really is in what are the elements of the story, because if you have something that's fairly smart at working out
Mm,
what the elements are, and like, if you need, we need somebody who follows this description, somebody who's sort of like this, or we need a villain for this thing, or we need somebody helpful for this. Well, do you know anyone like that in the area that you're in? Have you encountered some before that are still around? Well, then there should be a reasonable chance that maybe you get some recurring characters. And
right.
like I said before, with memory, that isn't just a chance. Oh, you see the same character. They will have memories. They will have opinions of you. They will have started based on how much you interacted with them, and you can eventually, ideally, build up a sort of whole set of friends and acquaintances and sort of people you know of and so on over time. You have the kind of network that people have in real lives as well. You just encounter a lot of people, and you have people around you that you know and recognize. And the same thing with villains and antagonists. If they're not killed, you know, they're maybe still up to their old tricks. So you have a lot of repeats there. And the same thing goes with like a lot of structures and other things you pick, because all these things in the stories can be abstracted out and
Oh, I was going
selected
to say,
that way.
like the enemies, like someone who you picked on as early on is going to grow up to be an important character, and he hates you.
Interesting.
That could happen for sure. And that's another big thing about the VGM and the AI so on, is that really the most complicated step of the whole system, of any story system, is to get it from the head of the creator to the computer in a way it can understand. That is far and away the most complicated step.
Right.
And one way people doing it is that they implement Lua into their game, and because it's fairly basic, most people can learn how to program Lua without too much trouble. And then they have them sort of work in
I
Lua,
was going to
and
say I didn't like it.
yeah,
Hmm.
right, exactly. But the point being that is not the way that people who tell stories express themselves.
Right.
And that also is not conducive to add the variability in there that you really want. If you want to repeat certain stories, but you really want to make sure they get adapted to your situation and your interests and the people you met and the places you are, then that story has to change quite a bit. And doing that in something like Lua is basically practically impossible. And so those are sort of the big things that I spent a good amount of time on. And
No, we had a conversation today, about an hour ago, about how to construct stories, and one of the discussions was keywords, for backup, lack of a better term, versus characters, and I definitely came on the side of characters.
well, I mean, yeah, I wasn't part of that conversation. So
Well, for good reason.
yeah, well, but I have yes, I was
I
part of
know
that
you have
conversation.
opinions, but
Yeah, I
bless
have very
bless
strong
your
opinions
heart.
there. But again, because there are smart, systematic ways of doing that that appeals to writers, but is something you could implement. Um, in terms of a very basic algorithm, it's very data heavy, but so what? That's stuff that you can generate or you can build up over time. So there are ways of doing that in a smart way. And AI, like the large language models, are actually potentially rather helpful on that. That's an area where I started looking at it, but I haven't really gotten as far as I would like with that. But
Right.
but there's some real potential there if I can get it to be consistent.
Okay. So I'd like to ask both of you gentlemen this. Starfield's procedurally generated environments face a lot of criticism for predictability. How are you ensuring Wayward Realms dungeons avoid this issue?
Okay, so it's not so much that they're they face criticism for predictability, because if you predict that there will be nothing there, you're probably right. I mean, there's a few encounter things, but once you see what the world looks like where you happen to land, that's really what the entire world looks like. Right? That's it. And then that's part. There's not a whole lot of variation on that,
Right.
and it does become kind of stale very quickly. So we we use an entirely different system to work this. Um, and there's a lot of custom work in there that it's a little hard to describe. But one of the techniques that is better known is that we make use of, I should say, is waveform collapse. And for those who are interested in programming, if you search for waveform collapse, there's plenty of examples online of what it can do. But it builds stuff that isn't. The whole point of it is that it's not predictable. It seemingly creates an endless amount of unique things, but within the parameters you can set.
Right.
In many ways, the way a human would do it as well.
Was there, and I don't know if this is a question that either of you can answer, but do you think there was a lack of that coming from games like Starfield that we're seeing today?
Nobody does any of these things. You see them in games, but not in role-playing games or things with larger 3D worlds and whatnot. But you see them in like Townscaper, or is that what it's called? I think it's called Town. It's a little game where you can build little towns,
like a mobile game.
I don't think it's a mobile game. I mean, it might be mobile, but no, it's a PC game. And there was another game with the airships, and you have their islands. It's just a big ocean with islands. You fly around with airships, and you build towns on those as well. I can't remember the name of it for some reason. I think it's still actually in early access. And as you build that, you may put down a tower or a walkway or something like that, and that reshapes the whole town in that area to something that look completely different. As you add little things, that whole section of town will change, and
Huh.
and it does a fantastic job of coming up with stuff like, oh wow, now it's got arches. Oh, now this is like got a big tower on it, and Townscape is much the same way where you just.
By the way, we are not doing a strategy like world building game.
No, not at all. But that's but the point being, you see the waveform collapse and similar algorithms out there. You just never see them in this type in a Wayward Realms type game, and there's no reason why you couldn't. I don't know if it's familiarity. I mean, and it is somewhat difficult to implement properly, but it is entirely doable. So maybe it's something that's coming. But that's sort of and if you look at those games and you see all the variations, and you cannot point to that and say, oh, that's totally predictable, because it isn't.
Yeah.
Right, and it generates some really imaginative stuff. So, and that's the kind of things that we will be using for this. So it won't be predictable at all. I wouldn't even know what comes up there.
Yeah, I do wonder. Reading some articles that come out of the video game journalist space. You do hear this question of why doesn't studio so and so update their engine, and we asked them and they said they're very familiar with what they're using and we just kind of upgrade it. I do wonder if familiarity does create creative barriers inside the video game industry, and it's kind of like something that doesn't really get identified or spoken about.
No, familiarity is definitely a thing. I mean, that's a significant cost to upgrading to either start a new engine or do a significant upgrade to it. So and there's the development speed and comfort, and also you've invested a lot of money in that engine.
I was going to say there is some point of it where you go like, it's very understandable.
Yeah.
Understandable from a business point of view.
Sure.
Like, because we have this IP, or we have whatever it is that created.
Well, I
We
mean,
want to
yeah,
look
it's
at.
some end of the day, we're entertainment and we're meant to make money.
Yeah, exactly. But for the programmers, at least in my experience, we are not so much fan of it. They because you built it and there it is and you're done with it, and now you don't want to sit there and muck around in the old stuff over and over again. You've learned a lot of stuff from that, and you can do something that's even better, but
Yeah.
that takes time and costs money and potential delays and so on. So it's not a popular suggestion. So for a variety of practical reasons, you end up sticking with what you know and what you have, because it's predictable and safe.
Yeah.
But
So
you're not going to get
one of
innovation.
the advantages of our game is obviously we're building on Unreal, as our base. Um,
Yeah.
but we've also had 5 years of R&D, so we can push it.
Yeah. Whereas, I'm glad you brought that up, Ted, because it seemed like in the very beginning, I've been looking at the development of the game since I believe either 2019 or 2018. And, as a person who's been, chomping at the bit, it might have been 2019 or 2020. I'm getting the years, I'm sure, mixed up. But as a person who's been chomping at the bit to get more information for Wayward Realms and certainly play the game, it sort of feels like, being in early development for as long as Wayward Realms is not an advantage, but it most certainly has been a huge
No,
advantage.
It
I
hasn't been full
mean it's
development
an
either.
advantage and a disadvantage.
Yeah, I
I
mean,
think you can do both ways.
but it hasn't been it hasn't been like with a full team. We started out with just kind of discussing it first, and then we discussed it. Started discussing details of the game. Just a few people. We had some people. So it started small and it's sort of been building. The team now we have a good amount of people who are very
40.
dedicated and 40,
Wow.
very dedicated and. Yeah, but we had a lot of volunteers before that. Now it's sort of a little more organized, but but that's not that's not what we were doing 5 years ago, right?
Right.
Or 4 years ago, or 3 years ago. That's it was much smaller. But yes, we have had a good amount of time to think about things for sure.
Yeah. Which is a
Yeah.
huge advantage. Of course,
Well, I mean, from my perspective as a guy who's in charge of creating the world, like that's a huge advantage. Like
Right.
to create a world and have no time constraints on like how long it takes me to figure out the place of liches in this world. Um, like that's fantastic.
yeah.
Yeah.
Again, I'm glad you brought that up, Ted. I wanted to actually get over to you regarding story and world building,
Mhm.
character generation, story progression, world exploration. I mean, can you explain at least a little bit your vision for players' first few hours in the game? What that might be like?
Um, sure, but I think the overall thing is it's really going to vary by the player. I really don't want to make a game where it's always the same. So if you're going to be a thiefy, assassinate character or whatever, you're going to have a totally different experience if you are joining in as a aristocrat or a wizard character or whatever. Like you might start off in the same basic place, but it's going to within a few hours it's going to differentiate itself.
Wow. In what ways do you think that gameplay might be similar, and in what ways is that going to be like vastly different in your
for
opinion?
for like different players or
Yeah, for different players.
I mean I can't imagine anything more different. Like if you're playing a game where you're an aristocrat trying to get into, the latest high society ball versus, a thief who's, being told you need to, go around and rob these people. Like, it's just almost joining different societies of the world.
Wow.
No,
And
part of the reason why it's different because normally we're used to that being part of the story, right? You come in and you start the story, and as the story progresses, you progress through your levels and whatnot, and they're very intimately tied to each other. And by the time the story is done, you're done, and so on. That's normally how these things work. But in this case,
Right.
there's a difference between the story and your character progression and the world progression. These are all things that all happen along the way. So how you start the game and what happens to you and how you progress is a thing. And then there's also the story that you can hook into and follow along with. But that those are not they're not hard wired together. So
Right.
that's why you can do different things. We don't have to write a story for every single combination, because the story will remain pretty much the same for everybody. The main story is the main story, but
what we call them world events.
right, yeah. But what happens to you, or what you pursue, and how you progress, and the things you experience will be very different based on how you act and what kind of character you are.
Okay. So we are looking at, for lack of a better term, we are looking at, a main quest, and there's several,
Mm,
quests, or am I thinking about this, a little bit too, rudimentary?
yeah, you are.
Great. I love that's great. I think folks are super, tired of the old standard formula in world exploration RPGs, where there's a main quest and I can veer off of it and get back to it. I mean,
Yeah.
how are things different here in Wayward Realms?
Almost can't explain it. There is, like I said, world events. Like, there are things going to happen. Um, and spoiler alert: the king at some point will die,
Hmm.
but you can help it along or you could slow it down. So that kind of thing will happen, and then there's a question of, like, who's going to take over. So that kind of thing happens, and it's part of the design to make it interesting and make the player involved, and then it actually builds from there.
It's interesting. It's almost as if it plays with the idea of the philosophy surrounding fate. You are, as an individual, fated to do this thing. It can happen early in life, it can happen later in life, and it seems like your story, Ted, is kind of taking the player through that. The archipelago is fated to have these world events happen, and based on how the player progresses through that story, if they so choose, it'll happen either early or late. Is in my
Yeah, no, that's fair. Yeah,
that's really exciting.
yeah. Thank you.
That's super cool. Um, Now, as I was listening to some other recorded interviews, you and Julian have had, there was a recent AMA that did discuss some weapons, and I heard within it, Ted, that some weapons are more effective against certain enemies, and I was, personally wondering, how does Wayward Realms ensure that I'm using the best weapon for like a mixed group of foes? I got skeletons coming at me on in one direction, and in the other direction, I got zombies coming at me. Uh,
Well, first of all,
yeah.
you can't ensure you're using the best weapons just because you're fighting them. Like, you probably should do some research and like find out, like, if I'm fighting skeletons, this is the best weapon for them. I'm saying as a player, not as a, or not saying you. I'm just saying as a player. Um, but we do have. ability to quickly switch weapons. You can. We do have an inventory, so you can choose different things for that. But
Hmm.
you kind of. Maybe the last thing I would say, we have an expertise system. So, like, there's actually no weapons that are useless.
Oh,
So you don't. Like maybe a sword in general is not the best weapon against a skeleton, but uh, expert swordsmen um, can take it apart.
that's really fantastic. So there's an expertise. Is that like a stat?
I'm not going to say anymore. Sorry.
Understood. Very good. So
I just literally, like I said, had the conversation about an hour ago. So
fantastic.
not gonna dive into what we're talking about.
Right. So expertise, being something in the game
But
can,
I'm just saying, like, if you're really good at like one weapon, you can take anything apart.
right. So I'm Indiana Jones. I fall into the train. I find a whip. I happen to
Oh
be.
my god! First of all, the whip is my ultimate cool weapon.
I I agree. I have a Leonin character in Dungeons and Dragons who uses a whip,
Yeah.
and he's hilarious with it. He's a paladin, and when he uses
Oh,
the
a
whip
paladin with a whip. That's cool.
with a whip, and the smite is great.
All right.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. Will will whips be in the game?
Um, if I have any pull, then yes.
Fantastic. Now on to magic. I want to stay with you, Ted, for just a minute more. You did mention that you don't want magic to be ubiquitous.
Hmm.
Can you explain your vision on how players will engage with magic? And then, as a side question, will magic be useful outside of combat?
No, for sure. Well, maybe second question first. For sure, like there will be healing spells and uh, you know, uh, transportation spells and things that will has have nothing to do with you know combat. But the overall thing was the only reason why we in our capacity think that like magic is cool is that it is unusual, and so we began with the idea of that, like, if someone fired a fireball down the street in you know the average Elder Scrolls games, people might look at it but not make a big deal about it. And we're like, no, it really needs to be, holy
Mhm.
like this is a big deal that this happened. Um, so magic to feel magical needs to be special. So
Understood.
it is unusual. It's kind of known, like the average like the average farmer knows it happens, has never actually seen it. His dad never saw it. Like this thing hardly ever happens, but he knows it's a thing.
Yeah, somewhere out there.
So like that's where we begin.
Very interesting. I really like the take, and I wonder how people who really love to play magic users, how they're going to feel about that. There's some folks out there that, like, you know I want to start off as an apprentice wizard, and then by the end of my game I want to be Gandalf. Like.
Well, here's the thing is it's equivalent of like you are someone who's gotten into an already rarefied environment, so you are not part of the average farmer, so you, um, hard to say how to explain it. Like you already uh it's
Oh,
equivalent. Like I always say, like magic is like murder.
mhm.
Um, that you know it happens, and you don't really want it to happen to you. Um, but if you are in something like the mob, which is the equivalent of getting in with the mages,
Yeah,
um, that you go like, well, this does happen from time to time to me.
yeah. I think that's a great way of explaining it. It's almost kind of like do I want to use this? I mean, kind of like an echo chamber effect, where if you're if you're involved in the crowd, you are experiencing the rare thing more. Um, is kind of how you're coming across to me right now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I think that's a really great way of explaining it, because in interviews past, I know you've said you don't want it to be ubiquitous, but then I was wondering, like, well, if I want to be a mage, is that going to mean that I'm hardly ever casting magic yet? So I understand where you're taking that, and I think that's really cool. Um, okay, so then over to Julian. I did want to ask, AI is really becoming a very key technology. Has it influenced
Oh, he's such a big fan.
of of AI?
I'm not a big fan, but it has its uses for sure.
Yeah,
Um, there are a couple, like I mentioned, like there are a couple of things dealing with the virtual game master, where it's potentially extremely useful and simplify some tasks that would have been obstacles before. But and we use AI in other places. It's helping out with some dialogue things, for example. So it'll be used sparingly, but where it has a really large impact, disproportionately large impact, I'd say. But yeah, so it added a lot to, but we only use it where there's really no other way of doing that. Where like in the before LLMs, like that we just wouldn't have done anything there. Couldn't we'd have to do something that's completely different. So it's sort of bridged some of those gaps, which has been nice. But so yeah, we use it, but it's but sparingly.
I understand. I want to pivot for a second, Julian, and I want to go from AI, and I want to ask about multiplayer. Is there a vision of multiplayer for Wayward Realms, and can you explain that to us?
It's under discussion,
Hmm.
but
Uh,
if they're what's under discussion is PVE,
right.
and it would be you peer to peer type stuff most likely, or at least something that would act that way. So yeah, the idea is that you could play, your friends could join your game, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
That is currently being discussed. We'll see where that goes, but because that's relatively straightforward. But there is a sort of certain minimum amount of work that needs to be done for any kind of multiplayer, just because the world needs to be consistent across all the machines. Um,
Right.
no matter how you do this, and that's a logic that you don't otherwise need. So that's a big chunk of work there.
Yeah, I would imagine with something as omni omniscient, omnipotent as the virtual game master. It's used to me making decisions, but now I bring in my buddy who is doing totally different gameplay, and now we're together. I'm wondering what kind of relationship with the
Yeah,
VGM.
that one. I mean, most likely, and that's one of the things that we did discuss here this weekend, is that you could be a completely different place in the story, and if you join your deal, that means that if you're joining somebody's game, then your story will have to be put on hold, basically. Then you can, when you join, whatever host you join, that's the story you take part of, because there's no way to run both of them at the
Right.
same time. It simply isn't possible. So, but then once you're done with that, then you go back to your own game and you're right back where you were in your story. That's at least how we're seeing it right now. That's all subject to change, obviously, but I just don't see any other way of solving that.
All right. Now, as we start to kind of wind things down a little bit, I want to thank you guys again for all of the, the time you've given us today. I do have a couple more questions. Julian, I did want to ask. You've given us a lot of information over the last, years on the technical details of the game, but what details regarding working on the Wayward Realms has made you the most excited about the game?
Yeah, it used to be you would have to write a 3D engine, you have to do all the rendering, the graphics, and on and on. These were things that would be exciting for me. That's not a thing you really do anymore. Right? I mean, the graphics libraries, Unreal does. They have they've got all that worked out. So I've less of an interest in that anymore because it's just not a big part of anything. What I've been much more excited about, and I haven't had a chance to do enough work on this. I've not spending a lot of time working on the game for health reasons. But the plan is to sort of ramp up the amount of time I spend on it in the coming month or two. And the thing that I'm most interested in are all the different systems that make the world sort of work. Commerce systems, faction relationship, gossip and chatter, and politics, family development.
Cosmology.
Well, the cosmology thing I think is pretty much worked out
It's
already.
kind of worked out.
Right. So all these different systems and there's a lot of them that all have to interact in very specific ways to make the whole world come alive.
Like holidays. That is that something?
Holidays would be part. There's a bunch of data that sort of goes with that it builds us on, sort of that define the world. Holidays would be one of them. Cosmological events, comets and whatever else you think
AI,
of.
obviously.
Tides. There's the seasons and all these things that happen in the world would all impact things like commerce, for example, like freight, you're transporting goods around, weather will be a factor, bandits would be a factor, infrastructure and destruction of infrastructure would be a factor, war would be a factor, disease is a factor, and so on and so forth. There's all these things that have to be taken into account with all these other systems, and then blended together so that it kind of works properly and feels right, but also not completely realistic because then it's just not fun.
Yeah, pulls you out.
I was going to say, you listed like 9 things that are terrible by humanity.
But they're not terrible when they're not actually happening. Then they're just exciting. But but yeah,
all right.
Reality, like the odds of this rumor making it there in time for this, or the odds of you meeting this one person that knows such a there are too many things that are just unlikely. So you want to make sure that they happen to you in an unreasonable rate.
I just have this idea of you and Ted having these plates balancing on sticks, and there's each one of you've got like 9 of them, trying to make sure that they're balanced and rotating just perfectly.
Yeah, basically, but then we slap each other on the ass from time to
time. Ted, I'm trying to find a way to use that as a pivot, and I probably shouldn't. So,
well,
Yeah. Speaking of,
right.
What sort of things do you think the RPG genre has left to explore that hasn't been fully realized in existing games, and how do you think Wayward Realms kind of pushes the envelope in that regard?
I mean, really, we thought we were going to go the direction of non-linear games. at the time we did Daggerfall, and obviously we did not. Um, and there have been really, really good games that have come out, but um, well, I'm not sure. Like I really think that they could have been better if they had gone that direction. So we're trying to correct the course.
I'm excited for it, and I'm all on board. I really am, and so is our community. The Discord community is really tight. It's ever growing. Ted, how can people who are listening right now, how can we support the game? What's the best way that we can support the game?
Honestly, two ways. The first way is you can actually continue to add on to our already successful Kickstarter,
Right.
and we'll get you a game. But getting onto Discord or YouTube or anything like that is also good.
Legendary disc Kickstarter campaign, by the way.
Yeah.
I
No,
mean,
no, it,
incredible.
it knocked me for a loop.
Absolutely incredible. It was what, 30 days, and
Hmm.
how much over the percentage did you did
Oh,
wait?
I don't know.
Like
I don't know
50
math.
percent over, or
Unlike
something like
you.
that. Yeah, I forget what exactly it is, but it was
Well, we asked for 500 and we got over 700.
yeah.
Wow. Congratulations. So thank you, Ted and Julian, for being very generous with your time. Thank you for all of your hard work. But from someone who has enjoyed tremendously your labor in Arena and Daggerfall and what's come thereof afterward. Uh, Thank you for your life's work, all of the hard work that you put into
You're too
the
kind.
controls. Uh,
Thank you
just
very much.
from fans to you, this is how we feel, and we love you guys for it. And so, with love, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, if you are looking to give a helping hand over to the Wayward Realms, you can do such things like wishlisting Wayward Realms on Steam. That's a huge help. Hang out with us on Discord. You can find that link at waywardrealms.com. You can follow them on social media at OnceLost Games. And
They can join. They can order us on still on Kickstarter.
yeah, still, and the Kickstarter is can they get there through
Absolutely.
waywardrealms.com?
Well, hopefully.
Yeah, I think
If
at least.
well, if not now, then we'll make it happen.
All right. Thank you everyone for listening, for downloading, and of course for supporting Wayward Realms. We'll see you in our travels, and until then, happy exploring. Take care, everyone. Have a great one.